The manhwa begins with the protagonist reflecting in disbelief, questioning what has happened again today. The focus shifts to a man who is one of the 4 dukes in the empire, Duke Claude Winterville. The Winterville family carries an ancient legend, which tells of their founder making a pact with a demon to gain immense physical power. This pact bestowed the descendants of the Winterville family with extraordinary physical abilities. As a result, many from the family have become highly skilled swordsmen, including Claude, who became the youngest swordsman in the empire at the age of just 14. The master of Duke Winterville is known to be a man so powerful that even the emperor trembles before him. He seems like the protagonist of a novel, but something feels off. The protagonist questions why he is acting this way, feeling confused by his behavior. Later, the protagonist is informed that her former fiancé, Zenon Olsen, came to her café. Zenon had canceled their engagement 4 months ago. Although she was initially swayed by his warm appearance, she now recalls his dark intentions and realizes that she cannot be with him. If things had continued the way they were, Zenon's sweet and lofty words might have deceived her into accepting his proposal. She once thought Zenon was the prince who would rescue her from her troubles, but in reality, he exploited her to gain the title of Duke. Claude uncovered Zenon's scheme, and had the situation followed the plot of the novel the protagonist possesses, she would have faced a terrible death. To avoid that fate, she decided to open a café far from the capital, where Claude resides. Yet despite her efforts, she feels as though Zenon still has a hold on her, which frustrates her as she tries to move forward. The protagonist is taken aback when the visitor implies that he came to the café for his own reasons, not simply as a customer. When asked if she regrets calling off the engagement, she feels a sense of relief, knowing it was the right decision. As he serves her coffee with enthusiasm, she is puzzled by his actions, unsure of his intentions. Her café is struggling financially, and although she can't turn away customers, rumors have spread that she does so for personal reasons. This was the day her café began to collapse. She sarcastically questions who he's teasing and what he means by, "Everything will turn out better." Confused, she wonders why he's there and why he's suddenly standing so close to her. He responds that it's good he can be there with her during such a financial crisis, implying that during tough times, she needs customers like him. Although she acknowledges this, she remains suspicious. When he declares that he'll handle the issue for her, the protagonist is shocked, wondering if this regular customer intends to become more involved than just supporting the café. His earlier words about everything turning out well now seem to carry deeper meaning. Despite all this, the protagonist just wants to live a peaceful life and focus on making coffee. 3 months ago, Yoon Min Ah, a university student living a busy life, passed away. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself in her favorite romantic fantasy novel, Irene in White. However, instead of being the protagonist, she became the antagonist, Renoan of April. In the novel, Renoan possesses a remarkable talent for white magic, an ability so powerful that it can dispel curses and prevent rebellion. Luckily, since Yoon Min Ah was familiar with the story, she knew what was coming. Before Zenon could discover this power, the engagement was abruptly called off. Renoan was sent away to Count Renoan, who had previously abandoned her, and all she received was a simple gift of taffy called payam. Up to that point, everything seemed fine, but the real problem now was her future. She wondered if she needed to find work to support herself. Though April's magical abilities could be incredibly useful, she didn't even know how to use them. Meanwhile, a man approaches and apologizes for the delay, delivering her coffee. The protagonist's thoughts quickly shift as she accepts the coffee and exclaims that it's the cheapest option she could afford. She then goes on to clean the shop, stretching her back after the hard work. Finishing up, she reflects on how opening her own cafe had always been a dream of hers before she was possessed by Renoan's character. Feeling a surge of emotion, she is so moved that she wants to cry. Although the cafe was far from the capital due to budget constraints, the protagonist feels a sense of accomplishment in having her own shop. She acknowledges that the distance no longer matters because she has achieved something she could never have done in her past life. Previously, she was always focused on making ends meet and never had the chance to chase her dreams, especially owning a cafe. Working part-time at a cafe in her previous life had unexpectedly become valuable experience for her current situation. She resolves to let go of old thoughts and focus on the present, ready to start fresh. However, 1 month later, the reality sets in. Despite her determination to open the cafe in a rural area, the number of customers is shockingly low. She reflects on how the locals, before she opened the cafe, had mocked her for serving coffee and desserts, items they believed were meant only for nobility. They sneered at her, thinking that a city girl like her was just showing off, and questioned whether her cafe could even succeed. Although she still has some money left to keep the cafe running, the situation is becoming increasingly concerning as the lack of customers persists. The protagonist starts thinking about how to attract more customers when she notices a boy standing outside the cafe, eyeing the cakes through the window. She immediately calls out to him, inviting him inside, but the boy hesitates, admitting that he doesn't have any money. He explains that if he had money, he would eat, but he simply cannot afford it. Understanding his situation, the protagonist smiles and tells him that he can have the food for free today, since he's her very first customer. The boy seems surprised but grateful, and she adds that he shouldn't eat alone, and invites him to bring his sister along to share the meal. The boy, overjoyed, joins her in the cafe and begins to eat the meal she prepared for him. He devours it eagerly, exclaiming that the dish is absolutely delicious, like a sweet cloud melting into milk. She watches him with fondness, advising him to eat more slowly, while inwardly marveling at how adorable he is. After a brief pause, she asks for his name and he shyly responds, Asher. She compliments him on his name and reflects that this cute little boy sitting before her has brought a meaningful change to her life. The protagonist's cafe, which had previously been empty, started attracting customers after an incident involving a young boy named Asher. However, a new issue arose when a distressed woman entered the cafe, crying out about a problem with an uninvited guest and her child being in pain. She was clearly upset, demanding answers. The female lead, reflecting on the situation, realized that the pain was possibly caused by Asher's stomachache after eating her food. She remembered the incident from a week earlier when she had first met Asher. During that encounter, Asher had expressed his inability to pay for the food due to a lack of money. The protagonist had offered an alternative, suggesting that he could bring fresh flowers for the cafe in exchange for the bread. Asher agreed to this arrangement, which was accepted as a fair trade. The following day, Asher brought a beautiful bouquet of flowers, which filled the cafe with a pleasant fragrance. This arrangement continued for a week, and the protagonist planned to have a meal with him as usual. However, the situation took a turn when Asher's guardian, Aunt Sarah, confronted the protagonist. She accused her of feeding Asher without her permission, claiming that it was the cause of Asher's diarrhea and demanding compensation. Sarah explained that Asher, who had lost his mother at the age of 3 and had no father, was under her care. Despite being his only family, Sarah did not provide proper care for Asher. She neglected his meals and left the house early in the morning, returning late at night. With Asher being only 5 years old, Sarah's neglect was evident. She insisted that the protagonist should cover the costs for both a doctor and a private car, as their village did not have a private doctor. Although the protagonist had intended to resolve the matter amicably, Sarah's demands and accusations made it clear that this would no longer be possible. The protagonist was taken aback by Sarah's claims, especially since she had been providing bread for Asher every day and was not aware of any neglect on her part. Renoan confronted Sarah about the state of Asher's clothing, noting that it was old and too small for him. She questioned how long it had been since Sarah had purchased clothes for Asher and expressed frustration over the difficulty of managing the child's needs while trying to make a living. Renoan was concerned that if this situation continued, it would create more awkwardness in the small village where outsiders like her were not well received. Sarah used the incident to cast doubt on Renoan's cafe, suggesting that the food served might have caused Asher's food poisoning. Despite Renoan's attempts to clarify that there was no wrongdoing, the situation had escalated. Asher, defending Renoan, explained that he had been hungry and received food from the cafe. But this did not change the fact that Sarah insisted permission should have been sought. Renoan realized that, given the tense circumstances, maintaining a good relationship with the villagers would be increasingly difficult. Renoan questioned whether it was wrong to feed a hungry child, acknowledging that feeding without the guardian's permission could be considered improper. However, she argued that demanding money in such a situation might be an even greater wrongdoing. She pointed out that everyone was aware of Asher's difficult living conditions and seemed to overlook that fact. As the conversation unfolded, Sarah reacted with anger and frustration, telling Asher that she had raised him, and that if Renoan was so good, he should go live with her. Sarah then abruptly left, telling Asher not to follow her. Asher, distressed and unsure, looked to Renoan for help. Seeing Asher in tears, Renoan realized that Sarah had left the child behind, and felt a sense of responsibility for Asher's situation. She offered Asher a place to stay with her, reassuring him that it was perfectly okay for him to do so. Sarah expressed her frustration and sense of misfortune, lamenting that her life had been filled with challenges. She recounted the tragic loss of her husband shortly after their marriage and her brother's departure from the capital. which left her struggling alone. Sarah felt betrayed by the villagers who were unsympathetic to her plight. She reflected on how, despite the hardships, she had hoped for happiness with her child Asher in their quiet home. The recent turn of events, including the departure of loved ones and the sense of abandonment, compounded her despair. Sarah was overwhelmed by the fear of losing Asher and felt that if he left her too, she would be left with nothing. Despite her harsh feelings towards Renoan for taking Asher, Sarah was deeply troubled by the thought of her child being taken away. Her focus shifted to the practicalities of survival, leaving her unable to properly address her emotions and the child's needs, even though she recognized that Asher was not at fault. Sarah, despite her struggles, was called by someone claiming to be a representative of the Lord. When she arrived, she was questioned about her grandson, Asher. The representative inquired about Asher's age and hair color. Sarah, puzzled by the sudden interest in her grandson, answered that Asher was 5 years old and had platinum blonde hair. The representative then mentioned that they would need to send a message to Duke Winterville, implying that they had found a child who met certain conditions. Duke Winterville, upon receiving this information, expressed satisfaction, indicating that they had finally located the child they had been searching for. The story of Claude's older brother, Leonard, was a tragic one. Leonard had deeply fallen in love with a commoner, which became a problem, as the people of Winterville strongly opposed their marriage. Eventually, the woman Leonard loved mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind only a letter apologizing for her departure. It was later revealed that she was pregnant at the time. Leonard, heartbroken, spent the rest of his life searching for both his lover and their child. Before he passed away last winter due to a chronic illness, Leonard begged his younger brother Claude to find his missing child. Claude had been searching for over a year, sending letters to various lords in an effort to locate the child. Finally, with a clue tied to the name of the woman, Jane, there seemed to be hope. Though Claude found the search bothersome, there was a practical side to it. If this child, Leonard's son, became the legitimate heir to the Winterville title, Claude would be spared from dealing with the complexities of love or marriage himself. While Duke Claude prepared to leave for Surin territory via the Manhwa, Renoan was dealing with Asher's rising fever. She suspected it was stress-related, as the shock of being abandoned by Sarah, his only family, must have deeply affected him. Despite his insistence that he was fine, it was clear to Renoan that Asher was struggling. Though hungry, Asher's throat was swollen, causing him to lose his appetite. Renoan tried to comfort him by offering hot chocolate, something she thought all kids would enjoy, hoping it would lift his spirits. However, there was another problem. Renoan had no first aid supplies to help lower his fever. She reached out to the village residents for assistance, but being seen as an outsider, her pleas were coldly rejected by everyone. Determined to help Asher, Renoan continued caring for him on her own, trying to soothe him with whatever means she had available. Renoan was still furious at the village for rejecting her help when Asher was clearly unwell. Yet, she knew there was no point in staying angry, and hoped that the hot chocolate would bring some comfort and healing to him. To her relief, Asher seemed to enjoy the hot chocolate. His eyes lit up as he remarked on how delicious it was, fascinated by the fluffy marshmallow that floated atop the drink. He even noted that the name Marshmallow sounded as soft as a cloud. Despite Asher's desire to stay awake and play, Renoan gently insisted that he needed to rest to recover fully. Promising that they could play tomorrow, she urged him to close his eyes and sleep. Asher reluctantly agreed. The next day, to Renoan's surprise, Asher greeted her enthusiastically, announcing that his fever had disappeared. Renoan, skeptical at first, checked him herself, and was astonished to find that he was telling the truth. His fever had indeed subsided. She marveled at how quickly Asher had recovered without any medicine. Asher smiled and confidently claimed that it was all thanks to the hot chocolate. Renoan playfully pinched Asher's cheek and asked him if he wanted another cup of hot chocolate. Asher, flustered, shook his head and squirmed, clearly embarrassed. Renoan, with a soft laugh, remarked that she had no choice and promised to make him another one. Asher's eyes lit up with excitement, and he eagerly confirmed his happiness. However, Renoan suggested that before making more hot chocolate, they should head to the bakery to buy some bread for breakfast. At the bakery, the owner apologized, saying that all the bread had been sold out. Renoan, noticing some loaves on the counter, inquired about them, but the owner responded with hesitation, claiming they were reserved. Suspicion filled Renoan's mind as she realized the discrimination, having seen a child purchase bread just moments earlier. Despite her growing frustration, she composed herself when Asher tugged at her sleeve, reassuring him that they would return home and bake their own bread instead. Asher agreed enthusiastically. Back at home, Renoan decided that white bread would take too long to ferment, so she opted to make scones instead. Asher, eager to help, asked what he could do, and Renowan handed him some dough, encouraging him to make the next batch. Asher eagerly stamped the dough into round shapes, pleased with his work. Renowan praised his efforts and assured him that she would finish it. Renowan instructed Asher to place the cut dough on a buttered pan. Before putting it into the oven, she reminded him to brush the surface of the dough with egg yolk. After baking it for 20 minutes, the freshly baked scones were finally done. Asher marveled at how delicious they looked, and Renowan warned him to eat carefully since they were still hot. Taking a bite, Asher exclaimed how crispy, nutty, and delicious the scones were. Renowan smiled, happy to see him enjoy the food. After a few moments, Renowan suggested they go out once they were done eating, hinting that there was a place she wanted to visit. Asher, filled with curiosity, eagerly asked where they were going, but Renowan simply told him he would find out soon enough. After finishing their meal, Renowan and Asher visited the bakery again. The bakery owner greeted them, asking if they were there to buy bread. Renowan, however, had something else in mind and explained that she had come to give them something. She mentioned that they had baked scones, still warm from the oven, and offered some to the owner. The owner hesitated, but before she could decline, a little girl showed interest in the scones. Renowan kindly offered her some, and the girl accepted them with excitement, expressing how delicious they looked. The little girl treated Asher kindly, without discrimination, which warmed Renowan's heart. Afterwards, Asher curiously asked why Renowan had given their scones to someone who wasn't particularly kind to them. He mentioned that the bakery owner had bread, but chose not to sell it to them earlier. Renowan explained that just because someone behaves badly, it doesn't mean they should follow suit. She believed that by treating others well, perhaps they would eventually change their behavior and treat her kindly in return. Asher asked what would happen if people continued treating her badly. Renowan paused for a moment and explained that sometimes, no matter how kind one is, the other person may not reciprocate. But in her view, that wasn't the point. She simply didn't see a reason to waste perfectly baked scones. Asher seemed to agree, though Renowan acknowledged that it might be a bit difficult for him to fully understand just yet. She assured him that whenever he wanted more scones, she would happily bake them for him again, and Asher enthusiastically offered to help next time. Meanwhile, the little girl from the bakery asked her mother if she could eat the scones Renowan had given them. Her mother, the bakery owner, sternly told her not to. Despite her mother's objections, the little girl took a bite and was amazed at how good they tasted. She tried convincing her mother to have some too, but the woman resisted at first, thinking about how she could have kicked them out earlier. However, after reluctantly tasting a scone herself, she was struck by how delicious it was. The realization hit her that Renowan had given them the scones out of genuine kindness, despite how she had treated them. As the bakery owner reflected on Renowan's arrival in the village, she vividly recalled Renowan's silky light pink hair shimmering in the sunlight and her delicate, pearly white skin. Though Renowan had tried to blend in, it was clear to anyone who saw her that she had the appearance of a noble. The bakery owner couldn't help but think how strange it was that such a young lady like Renowan would be running a cafe in a rural village. She wondered if Renowan had ever experienced the hardships of making ends meet, or even cooked for herself. In her mind, Renowan was probably just playing around while servants did all the real work. The villagers had immediately been hostile toward her, convinced that a noble like Renowan wouldn't last long in such a place. But she had mocked and disregarded Renowan, certain that she was just as arrogant and lazy as any other noble. However, as time passed, the bakery owner began to see Renowan's true nature. She noticed how Renowan diligently wiped down the cafe's tables every morning, never letting the villagers' disdain affect her. Despite the cold stares and gossip, Renowan always greeted everyone with a smile. According to rumors, a cell had been neglected and abandoned by his aunt, Sarah, but Renowan had taken him in and cared for him like her own. Renowan was completely different from what they had expected. She was sincere, hardworking, and far from the arrogant noble they had imagined. The bakery owner began to realize that she might owe Renowan an apology. When her daughter asked if she truly felt that way, she decided to make amends. She suggested they visit the cafe together, offering some of her bread in return for the delicious scones Renowan had given them. Her daughter happily agreed, excited about the idea. Meanwhile, Renowan found herself wondering what exactly the bakery owner had told the villagers. To her surprise, the cafe was suddenly brimming with customers in just one day. One of the customers called out to her, asking if they could order what Mrs. Joe had recommended. Smiling, Renowan agreed to prepare it, grateful that she had an espresso machine to help with the influx of orders. She reflected on how coffee had taken the world by storm after being accepted by the empire. Due to advancements in both magic and alchemy, The tools required to brew coffee had reached an incredibly high quality, making it even easier to serve her customers with the finest drinks. Even though Renowan's cafe was now bustling with customers, she was aware that the coffee menu remained limited. The reason was the lack of advanced steam machines, which had yet to be developed. It was a shame, she thought, that such limitations prevented her from offering more. However, she resolved that once she earned enough money, she would seek out an alchemist or wizard to craft a steam machine for her. As the cafe filled with a gentle buzz, one of the lady customers excitedly complimented the coffee she was drinking, commenting on its sweetness and delicious flavor. Renowan explained that it was a vanilla latte, a blend of coffee, milk, and vanilla syrup that provided a smooth, non-overpowering experience for first-time coffee drinkers. The lady smiled, admitting that, even though she thought she knew how to make coffee, Renowan's creation had surprised her. The lady thanked Renowan and wished her a lovely day as she left. Another customer, a man, encouraged Asel to keep up the good work. Asel, smiling brightly, invited him to come back soon. Renowan, watching Asel, was relieved to see him healthy and happy again. She reflected on the sudden interest in the cafe, unsure if it would last. She figured it might only be a one-day affair, but still, deep down, she hoped that tomorrow would be just as successful as today. The next morning at Renowan's cafe, customers were already lining up eagerly. A man called out, requesting a coffee, and Renowan responded that it would be ready soon. Another customer asked if the cafe would be open that day as well, to which Renowan replied yes, though she was curious as to why everyone was there so early. One customer enthusiastically requested the same cup of coffee from the day before, claiming that it had kept him energized at work. Another chimed in, saying that his back pain had disappeared after drinking the coffee and asked for the same order again. The crowd started clamoring for more coffee, demanding it immediately. Renowan, trying to calm them down, reminded everyone to wait patiently. She explained that coffee didn't have such miraculous effects, but it did have a stimulating quality. As Renowan hurried to prepare the orders, Ash noticed her looking exhausted and asked if she was okay. Renowan assured them that she would be fine, though it was clear she was running late. She then asked if they were hungry, and suggested they sit down to have dinner, trying to maintain her composure amidst the chaos. In the evening, Renowan heard a voice calling out from outside the cafe. The unfamiliar tone didn't belong to any of the local residents, which made her feel cautious. She wondered if the person was waiting outside and decided to open the door. Upon seeing the visitor, she noticed his silver hair, which made her think for a moment before asking who he was. Turning to Asel, she told him to go inside. However, the man, introducing himself as Duke Claude Winterville, insisted that it would be better for the child to stay. Surprised and uneasy, Renowan asked about his relationship with the child. The Duke, realizing his mistake, apologized for his rudeness and acknowledged that she was right. He formally introduced himself as Claude Winterville, revealing his noble status. In shock, Renowan couldn't believe what she had just heard. This man standing before her was Claude Winterville, the very same who, according to the original story, brutally kills her. Panic began to rise within her as she questioned why he had come all the way to her cafe. Trying to maintain her composure, she asked if they could come inside and talk, rather than having such an intense conversation at the doorstep. Once inside, she anxiously asked why he had traveled so far to meet them. The Duke responded calmly, stating that he was there to take the child. Panic surged through her as she tried to delay him, pleading for an explanation. His expression, however, revealed a puzzled look, as if silently asking if there was some kind of problem. Before she could react further, the Duke's aide, Lloyd Hanger, stepped forward to clarify the situation. He introduced himself as the aide to Duke Winterville and explained that their family was in search of a specific child. Based on the tip they had received, Asel matched the description, which was why they had come to investigate. With a more formal tone, Lloyd politely asked Renowan about her relationship with the boy, hoping to clear up the matter. Renowan felt a surge of anxiety as she pieced together the situation. In the original story, Claude was in search of his long-lost nephew, intending to make him his heir. Both Asel and Claude shared the rare trait of silver hair, and it dawned on her that Asel might indeed be the nephew Claude was searching for. She hesitated for a moment, but ultimately confessed that she was merely a temporary guardian to Asel. Turning to Asel, she encouraged him to greet the men. Nervously, Asel stepped forward and stammered out a shy, "Hello." Lloyd smiled kindly and greeted him back. "Hello, young master." He then explained that they wanted to conduct a few tests to confirm whether Asel was the person they were looking for. Asel looked confused, not fully understanding what the tests might entail. Renowan bent down and whispered gently into his ear, urging him to take the test. Asel, how about you take the test? You might even find your father. Asel took a deep breath and nodded, determined. Yes, I'll do it. Renowan's heart raced as she witnessed the Duke drawing blood with a dagger, feeling shocked by the unnecessary display in front of Asel. She couldn't help but wonder why they would perform such an act in front of a child. The Duke calmly handed the dagger to his another man, who praised him for his precision, while Renowan, still flustered, offered to fetch needles instead, remarking that a knife would be too much for a child. She quickly mentioned that she had needles and would go get them, but paused to ask how much blood they needed. A man reassured her that just a single drop would be sufficient. Renowan, blinking in disbelief, questioned why they hadn't used a needle from the beginning. The Duke then turned his attention to Asel, asking if he could bear the small sting. Asel, showing bravery, assured him that he would be fine. After the blood drop was collected and analyzed, the Duke's expression softened, confirming that Asel was indeed his nephew. Renowan was taken aback, asking if the boy was truly his nephew. Claude solemnly confirmed that Asel was the long-lost son of his brother Leonard. Asel hesitated, asking if he would be able to meet his father, but the Duke bluntly responded that Leonard had died a year ago. Renowan found it unsettling how casually Claude spoke of his brother's death. The Duke reassured Asel that now that it was confirmed he was his nephew, the Winterville family would take care of him from now on. Asel would also be named his successor and could have everything he desired. Renowan, alarmed by this sudden decision, questioned the Duke, pointing out that he hadn't mentioned anything about naming Asel his successor before. The Duke responded calmly, asking if she had any objections. She was more concerned about the future, explaining that if Asel were chosen as the heir, it could affect marriage prospects later on. She hinted that even if Asel's future wife bore a child, it would be rare for that child to become the successor if an heir had already been declared. The situation might even lead to dangerous power struggles within the family, potentially putting Asel at risk. The Duke dismissed her concerns, reassuring her that he had no intentions of marriage and did not want a succession struggle in his estate. He then explained that the declaration of Asel as his heir would take place at the palace after a proper test with an artifact. Asel, feeling overwhelmed, tried to assert himself, declaring that he had a name, and it was Asel. He was about to say more when a voice interrupted, and a servant rushed in, announcing that someone had arrived first. Renowan was startled when she realized who had come. It was Sarah, and Renowan couldn't help but wonder why that woman was there. Asel greeted the Duke nervously, but the Duke was taken aback by the presence of a man he identified as a baron. He questioned the baron's authority and reminded him that no Winterville should bow to someone of such a lower rank. The man tried to defend himself, but Sarah quickly interjected, encouraging Asel not to bow to anyone anymore, as he was now a member of the Winterville family. The Duke, intrigued by Sarah's sudden appearance, asked who she was. Sarah introduced herself as Asel's aunt, claiming to be his only blood relative, and emphasizing their supposed close relationship. She tried to convince the Duke that Asel became anxious without her presence, and asked if she could accompany them to Winterville. Renowan, shocked, thought to herself that Sarah's words were nothing but lies since she had abandoned Asel in the past. The Duke, however, saw through Sarah's act and bluntly stated that he wasn't so easily fooled. He declared that he was there solely to take his nephew with him. Sarah attempted to protest, arguing that Asel's anxiety should be considered, but the Duke dismissed her concerns, assuring her that anyone from Winterville would adapt quickly. At that point, Renowan stepped in, suggesting that Asel's opinion should be taken into account, especially since he might not want to go to the Winterville family. Sarah, dismissive of Renowan's suggestion, assumed Asel would want to go. However, when the question was posed to Asel directly, he surprised everyone by expressing his desire to stay with Miss Renowan, saying he didn't want to go to Winterville. On a pleasant morning with clear skies, the aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans filled the air, creating a lovely ambiance for the villagers who had quickly grown accustomed to their daily coffee routine. Renowan had prepared plenty of coffee beans for the guests she expected to visit that morning, as usual. However, to her surprise, no one came. There were no customers today, and she was quick to place the blame on Duke Winterville. She grew increasingly frustrated as she noticed the Duke simply sitting there, seemingly unaware of the disruption his presence was causing. She expressed her concerns, explaining that his presence was deterring her usual customers from entering the café. Duke Winterville, in response, seemed puzzled, questioning how that could be possible. Renowan firmly clarified that the villagers were too intimidated to step inside with him there. She urged the Duke to find other ways to persuade Asel, emphasizing that his constant presence was not helping. The Duke attempted to counter, claiming he had tried numerous times to call Asel over, but the boy refused to come out. Despite his efforts, Renoan insisted that he should return another time and leave her cafe in peace. Internally, Renoan couldn't shake her discomfort. Knowing the original story, she felt uneasy being in the same room as the man who had killed her once before. The Duke, seemingly oblivious to Renoan's earlier frustration, suggested that if his presence was affecting business, perhaps he could stay as a customer instead. Renoan tried to clarify that this wasn't what she meant, but before she could fully explain, the Duke made an extravagant request, ordering everything on the menu. Although Renoan felt conflicted, she couldn't deny the value of making a sale, even if it was for the Duke. As she began preparing his order, the Duke simplified his request to 10 Americanos, which eased the pressure slightly. Renoan considered that perhaps his presence might actually help business if handled correctly, so she decided to leave things as they were for the time being. Despite her reservations, she hoped he would enjoy his coffee. When the first Americano was ready, Renoan brought it to him. The Duke was surprised by an additional drink he hadn't ordered, to which Renoan explained it was on the house, a gesture in honor of him being the first customer to order 10 drinks at once from her cafe. Curious, the Duke asked what would happen to the remaining 9 drinks. Without hesitation, he instructed her to distribute them to the men accompanying him. Even after doing so, 3 cups remained, which quickly found takers as others approached, eager to enjoy a cup of coffee. The men accompanying the Duke suddenly realized his presence and expressed their humble apologies for not recognizing him sooner. However, the Duke, showing a more relaxed side, told them not to worry and to make themselves comfortable. Despite his reassurance, they remained tense and on edge, unable to fully relax in his presence. The Duke, noticing the hesitation in the air, reminded everyone that he didn't mind their presence at the cafe. Reluctantly, the men excused themselves, and Renoan, internally annoyed, thought to herself that the Duke might be powerful, but he wasn't the ruler of her cafe. Following his instruction, she handed the remaining 3 cups to a group of ladies nearby. As Renoan presented the coffee, she explained that the Duke had graciously bought it for them. Knowing that Americanos could be bitter, especially for first-time coffee drinkers, she offered to add syrup if needed. One lady insisted she was fine with the bitterness, while another politely asked for syrup to soften the strong taste. As more customers entered the cafe, there was a palpable sense of unease in the air, due to Claude's intimidating presence. Some even attempted to avoid entering, but after being subtly coerced by the Duke's stern tone, they cautiously stepped inside. The initial awkwardness lingered only momentarily, as the warm, inviting smell of freshly brewed coffee and the lively chatter soon filled the space. Before long, the cafe returned to its usual buzz, with the customers enjoying their drinks, the scent of coffee enveloping the room, and Claude quietly sipping his Americano amidst the bustle. After wrapping things up for the day, Renoan informed the Duke that their business was done. The Duke acknowledged and mentioned that he would take his leave, but promised to return tomorrow. Surprised, Renoan questioned why he would come back so soon. The Duke explained that he hadn't seen Asel today and intended to try again tomorrow. Renoan assured him that she would do her best to help with Asel, implying that his presence might not be necessary. The Duke then reached for his wallet, nearly forgetting to settle the bill, and handed her the payment. Renoan was taken aback, noticing that the amount he offered seemed excessive. She hesitated, asking if it wasn't too much, to which the Duke replied that because of him, her business had suffered. He believed the extra payment was only fair compensation. Inwardly stunned by the generosity, Renoan marveled at how the wealthy lived but decided to accept the payment without further hesitation. As the Duke prepared to leave, he reassured her once more that he would be back the next day. Afterward, Renoan turned to Asel and asked if he was hungry, suggesting they have dinner together. Asel hesitantly asked if the Duke had left, referring to him as that man. Renoan gently corrected him, reminding Asel that the Duke was his uncle, and had even called him his nephew during his last visit. However, Asel found the idea of being related to the Duke a bit absurd. Renoan countered that she actually saw a resemblance between the two, but Asel remained unsure, still visibly shaken. Hoping to lift his spirits, Renoan encouraged Asel to eat, and he expressed gratitude for the food. She asked him how it was, and Asel enthusiastically responded that it was delicious. Renoan then cautiously broached the subject, asking if he was truly not going to go with the Duke. Misunderstanding her intentions, Asel asked if she was planning to kick him out. Renoan quickly reassured him that wasn't her intention at all. She only wanted him to be in a good environment, but if he didn't wish to go, he was welcome to stay with her as long as he liked. Asel nervously asked if she would continue giving him meals like this every day, and Renowan smiled, reminding him that he paid for his meals in flowers instead of money. Asel excitedly remembered and promised that starting tomorrow, he would pick even prettier flowers for her. Despite his cheerfulness, doubt lingered in Renowan's mind, wondering if everything would truly be okay. She recalled the Duke's words about returning tomorrow, and wondered aloud if it would be all right, even if she didn't send Asel to Claude. Meanwhile, Lloyd apologized to the Duke for the accommodations, explaining that he had rented the best room available despite the rural location. The Duke, however, remained unbothered, stating that the room would suffice for now given the circumstances. He then suggested that Lloyd return to the capital, assuring him that he would personally take care of persuading Asel. After all, Asel was his nephew, and the Duke believed he could convince him to return to Winterville without issue. Reflecting on his past, the Duke explained that he had been living in the capital in search of Asel until recently. Winterville's territory, located in the rugged northern mountains of the Empire, was a dangerous place full of monsters. During his time as Duke, he frequently participated in monster subjugation missions in place of the sick Leonard, which made him accustomed to camping in cold weather and enduring a lack of sleep. Needing rest, the Duke instructed Lloyd to stop their conversation there and take his leave. Lloyd, acknowledging the Duke's need for rest, lit a sleeping incense and, after coughing slightly from its fumes, excused himself from the room, wishing the Duke a peaceful rest. The Winterville family possessed an extraordinary physical ability, which was seen as both a blessing and a curse. The legends surrounding their family suggested they had made a contract with demons, and as a result, the immediate descendants were granted monstrous strength. However, this power came at a cost. Demonic energy gradually accumulated within their bodies over time. As the demonic energy built up, the Duke became more sensitive, with his 5 senses developing in an unnatural way. His body grew so attuned that even the slightest sounds caused a reaction. This heightened sensitivity made it difficult for him to fall into a deep sleep, something he hadn't experienced in years. Despite using sleep incense to help him rest, it had little effect, though it provided some relief. One morning the Duke awoke, noting that he had managed to get some sleep, though nothing seemed out of the ordinary. His abilities left him with little hunger, and he realized he hadn't eaten anything since leaving the capital. Despite this, one factor remained on his mind, prompting him to return to the café. When he arrived, Renowan warmly welcomed him inside. Noticing Asel hadn't woken up yet, Renowan offered to wake him. The Duke, however, preferred to let Asel rest a while longer, deciding to wait. Duke Winterville was curious about the coffee he had the previous day, and questioned Renowan about what exactly was in it. Renowan assured him that the Americano was made with just espresso and water, nothing out of the ordinary. Still suspicious, the Duke pressed further, even asking about the type of water used, which Renowan explained was simply from the village well. Growing increasingly puzzled by the Duke's line of questioning, Renowan wondered what was going on. The Duke insisted on checking the kitchen himself, which startled Renowan. As he prepared to investigate, Asel suddenly intervened, demanding that the Duke stop and not harass Renowan. Asel firmly insisted that the Duke apologize to her, and after some hesitation, the Duke complied, albeit somewhat awkwardly. He admitted he had no intention of harassing her, and offered an apology for his rudeness. Renowan, though initially startled, accepted his apology, and found herself unexpectedly touched by the gentleness in his words. Up until now, she had encountered many nobles who were arrogant and disrespectful. When she first saw Claude introduce himself as a Winterville, she assumed he would be no different. Yet, his behavior was beginning to surprise her. Renowan was puzzled by the Duke's sudden question about the coffee. She asked if there was any particular reason for his inquiry, wondering if the coffee might have tasted strange. The Duke clarified that the coffee was plain but delicious, and he wanted to check something specific. He requested that Renowan prepare a cup of coffee in front of him. After a brief wait, Renowan prepared to make the coffee. Lloyd, confused by the Duke's request, inquired about the reason behind it. The Duke explained that he simply wanted to observe the process of making coffee. Lloyd was surprised by the Duke's sudden interest in learning how to make coffee, but acknowledged that it was not an impossible request. Renowan proceeded with the demonstration, starting by boiling water in a kettle. She then ground the coffee beans using a grinder, placed the ground coffee into the portafilter, and tamped it down. Finally, she inserted the portafilter into the machine and brewed the espresso, showing how straightforward the process was. Renowan was keenly aware of the intense gaze directed at her, wondering if making coffee was truly such a fascinating sight. She realized it made sense, given how rare it was for people to witness the coffee-making process up close. She completed the preparation by pouring the extracted espresso into the cup with boiled water. When the Duke questioned what Renowan had done just before, she was confused and insisted she hadn't done anything unusual. She was taken aback when the Duke implied she might have cast a spell. Renowan firmly denied any use of magic, explaining that she simply hoped the coffee would turn out delicious. Despite her protests, the Duke persisted, mentioning a strange light he had seen when the coffee was being prepared. Renowan was baffled, asserting that no light or magic was involved, though the Duke and others present confirmed seeing the light seep into the coffee.